The fastest way to learn who someone really loves is to watch who they choose when they cannot keep everyone happy. The chandelier above our dining table cast warm golden light across polished wood, crystal glasses, and carefully arranged plates of food that had taken me 3 hours to prepare. Anyone looking through the window would have thought we were the perfect family. Successful husband, loving wife, Sunday dinner with his mother. They would have been wrong. I knew something was off the moment Ryan refused to look at me. For 12 years, I had learned to read every shift in his expression, every silence, every hesitation. Tonight, he barely touched his food. Across from him, Margaret Carter sat perfectly straight in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was the smile she wore whenever she believed she had already won. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, tension sat at the table with us. "Ryan has something important to tell you," Margaret said as she folded her napkin neatly in her lap. My stomach tightened. Ryan stared at his plate for another second before finally looking up. "Emma," he began. The sound of my name in his voice felt strangely distant. "We need to talk about the house." "The house. Not our house. Not home. The house." I set down my fork. "What about it?" He glanced toward his mother before answering. That tiny movement told me everything. "I think it would be best if we sold it." I blinked. "Sold it? Or transferred ownership?" Margaret took a slow sip of wine. "That would be the smart decision." I ignored her completely. "Ryan, what are you talking about?" He exhaled heavily. "My mother needs somewhere permanent to live." I stared at him. "She already has somewhere to live." "Not anymore," Margaret interrupted. "The condo is being sold." I looked back at Ryan. "So your solution is to give her our house?" His jaw tightened. "Emma, please do not make this harder than it needs to be." Harder than it needs to be. The words echoed in my head. 12 years. 12 years of sacrifices. 12 years of helping him build a business from a folding table in our garage. 12 years of believing we were partners. And suddenly I was the problem. Margaret leaned back in her chair. "A good wife supports family." I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I watched my husband carefully. "And where exactly am I supposed to go?" Ryan hesitated. "Not long. Just long enough. You can find an apartment." Silence filled the room. Rain continued tapping against the glass. Somewhere in the kitchen, the refrigerator hummed quietly. The ordinary sounds felt surreal. "You want me to leave?" I asked. "By the end of next month." Margaret smiled openly now. Ryan did not stop her. He did not defend me. He did not even look ashamed. And that was when something unexpected happened. I smiled. Not because I was happy. Not because I was defeated. I smiled because after months of unanswered questions, everything suddenly made sense. Ryan noticed immediately. "Why are you smiling?" he asked. I folded my hands calmly in my lap. "Because," I said softly, "you just made a very expensive mistake." Ryan stared at me as though he had never seen me before. Margaret's smile faltered for the first time that evening. Neither of them had expected that reaction. They had expected tears, anger, begging, anything except calm. I reached for my water glass and took a slow sip. The ice clinked softly against the side. "Emma," Ryan said carefully, "this is not a threat. We are trying to find a practical solution." I almost laughed. Practical. That word had built his entire career. Practical was working 60 hours a week while he tried to launch his company. Practical was refinancing my car to cover payroll during his second year in business. Practical was postponing vacations, birthdays, and dreams because we believed we were building something together. A practical solution for who? I asked. Margaret folded her arms. "You are being dramatic." "Am I?" I turned toward her. "Your son just informed me that I need to leave my own home." "It is his home." The words came quickly, too quickly, as though she had been waiting months to say them. Silence settled across the table. Rain continued sliding down the windows in long silver streaks. I looked at Ryan. He said nothing. That hurt more than anything Margaret could have said. "Do you agree with her?" I asked quietly. His eyes dropped to the table. "Legally, the property is in my name." There it was. The sentence he thought would end the discussion. The sentence he believed gave him control. What Ryan did not realize was that I had spent the last 6 months asking myself questions. Questions that had begun the day I discovered documents missing from our home office. Questions that grew louder every time Margaret suddenly appeared in decisions that should have belonged to a husband and wife. Questions that led me somewhere neither of them expected. I set down my glass. "Interesting," Ryan frowned. What is interesting? The fact that you keep talking about names on paper. Margaret rolled her eyes dramatically. Here we go. I ignored her. You know what I find funny? Ryan shifted uncomfortably. Emma. No, really. I smiled again. I find it funny that after 12 years together, you think this conversation is about a house. His expression tightened. For a moment, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Just a flicker. Then it vanished. You are upset. Of course I am upset. I pushed back my chair and stood. But not for the reason you think. Margaret watched me carefully now. Her confidence was beginning to crack. People become nervous when a situation refuses to follow the script they prepared. Where are you going? Ryan asked. Upstairs. We are not finished talking. I looked at him. Really looked at him. The man I married. The man I once believed would stand beside me through anything. Actually, I said softly, I think you already said everything you wanted to say. I turned and walked toward the staircase. Neither of them followed. Halfway up, I paused. Something told me to look back. Ryan was staring after me with confusion. Margaret looked irritated. Neither expression concerned me anymore. Because for the first time in months, the pieces were finally fitting together. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the house fell silent, I sat alone in my home office. A small desk lamp illuminated the room. Rain tapped against the glass. My laptop glowed softly in the darkness. I opened an email that had arrived earlier that afternoon. Attached was a scanned document from 20 years ago, a document I had spent weeks trying to locate. My attorney had finally found it. I stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. Then I smiled. Because the moment I saw those words, I knew something Ryan did not. The house was never the biggest mistake he made that night. The real mistake was assuming I had no idea what I actually owned. The next morning arrived gray and cold. Sunlight struggled through heavy clouds, casting pale light across the kitchen floor. I was already awake when I heard Margaret's voice downstairs. She always spoke loudly when she wanted me to hear her. The guest room will make a perfect office, she said. After Emma leaves, we can finally renovate properly. I poured coffee into my favorite mug and listened from the hallway. Ryan answered with a tired grunt. He sounded exhausted. Good. I had barely slept myself, but my exhaustion came from years of carrying a marriage that neither of them fully appreciated. The difference was that I had finally stopped pretending everything was fine. I carried my coffee into the office and opened my laptop again. The scanned document waited exactly where I had left it. 20 years old. Buried beneath layers of corporate filings, property records, and forgotten agreements. Most people would have overlooked it. My attorney had not. I zoomed in on the signature at the bottom. Then I opened a second file. Then a third. Every piece fit together perfectly, like a puzzle someone had tried very hard to scatter. My phone rang. It was Olivia, my attorney. Please tell me you are sitting down, she said. I smiled. I am. Good. Because I spent half the night reviewing everything. Papers shuffled on her end. Emma, this is even bigger than we thought. I leaned back in my chair. How much bigger? The original investment structure was never amended. My pulse quickened. You are sure? 100%. She paused. Your signature appears on documents connected to every major expansion Ryan's company made during the first 5 years. I looked out the window toward the backyard. Frost covered the grass. The swing we bought 10 years ago stood motionless beneath a maple tree. Ryan does not know, I said quietly. That much is obvious. Olivia laughed softly. If he knew, he would not be trying to force you out of anything. The sound of footsteps approached the office door. I muted the call just before Ryan entered. He looked uncomfortable. The confident certainty from the night before had disappeared. Can we talk? He asked. We are talking. His eyes moved toward the laptop. What are you working on? Nothing important. That was a lie. A very satisfying lie. He shifted his weight awkwardly. About last night. What about it? Things got heated. I stared at him. You told me to leave my home. I was trying to help my mother. There it was again. The excuse. The justification. The same sentence he had repeated in different forms for years whenever Margaret crossed a line. I closed my laptop gently. Ryan, when was the last time you chose me? His mouth opened, then closed. The silence lasted several seconds too long. That is not fair. No, I agreed. It is not. He rubbed his forehead. I do not want this to become a fight. Then you should have thought about that before announcing my eviction over dinner. His expression tightened. Nobody is evicting you. I almost laughed. The revision of history had begun faster than expected. Before I could answer, Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Ryan, the contractor is here." She glanced at me. "Still working?" "Yes." "On what?" I smiled pleasantly. "My future." Something flickered across her face. Suspicion. For the first time, Margaret looked uncertain. Just for a second. Then she recovered. "Well, make sure you plan carefully." I waited until she disappeared down the hallway before reopening my laptop. A new email had arrived from Olivia. Attached was another document. This one carried a date from 12 years ago, the year Ryan and I got married. I clicked it open. My smile slowly returned. Because buried in the final paragraph was a clause neither Ryan nor his mother had ever seen. And if I was reading it correctly, everything they thought they owned was about to become a very different conversation. 3 days later, the first crack appeared. Not in my marriage. That had happened years ago. The crack appeared in Ryan's business. I was standing in the kitchen pouring coffee when I heard his voice from the dining room. He was trying very hard to sound calm. "What do you mean they are delaying the project?" A pause. "For how long?" Another pause. I carried my mug toward the doorway without making a sound. Ryan sat at the table with his laptop open, one hand pressed against his forehead. The confident entrepreneur who had informed me I could leave by the end of the month suddenly looked much older. "There has to be another solution," he said. "We already committed resources." More silence. Then his shoulders slumped. "Fine. Keep me updated." He ended the call and stared at the screen. Margaret entered the room seconds later. "What happened?" "Nothing. Ryan." He sighed heavily. "One of the commercial developments was delayed." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "That happens all the time." "Not like this." She sat across from him. "You are overreacting." I almost smiled. That was always her answer whenever reality became inconvenient. Ryan noticed me standing in the doorway. "Morning." "Good morning." He studied my face as if searching for something. Sympathy, perhaps. Concern. The old version of me would have offered both immediately. The new version simply sipped her coffee. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Just a minor issue. I am sure it will work out." Margaret narrowed her eyes slightly. My calm seemed to bother her more every day. Later that afternoon, I met Olivia at her office downtown. Rain drummed softly against the windows while she spread documents across a conference table. "You are going to enjoy this," she said. "That sounds promising." She slid a folder toward me. I finished tracing the funding records. My pulse quickened. "And?" Olivia smiled. "Emma, do you remember the emergency loan from 12 years ago?" I laughed softly. How could I forget? We almost lost everything. Ryan's company had been weeks from collapse. Banks refused to help. Investors disappeared. Employees were preparing to leave. Back then, Ryan believed a private lender had stepped in at the last moment. Olivia tapped the folder. The lender was not private. I stared at her. "What are you talking about?" "The capital originated from an account you controlled." For a moment, I simply blinked. "No, yes." She turned the document around. My signature sat at the bottom. My account number appeared beside it. Memory rushed back immediately. I remembered selling an inherited investment portfolio after my father's death. I remembered transferring money to save the company. What I did not remember was the legal structure attached to the agreement. Olivia pointed to a highlighted section. "This clause changes everything." I read it twice. Then a third time. My heart began pounding. Ryan never saw this. Apparently not. "Margaret." Olivia laughed. "Definitely not." I sat back slowly. 12 years. 12 years of listening to people describe me as supportive, helpful, loyal. None of them knew the truth. I had not simply supported the company. I had saved it. And according to the documents in front of me, that decision gave me rights neither Ryan nor his mother had ever considered. My phone vibrated. A text message from Ryan appeared on the screen. "We need to talk tonight. Important." I looked at Olivia, then at the highlighted clause, then back at the message. For the first time, I had the strange feeling that Ryan was beginning to realize something was wrong. The problem for him was that he was still looking at the wrong piece of the puzzle. That evening, Ryan was waiting for me when I walked through the front door. He stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, staring out at the backyard as twilight settled over the neighborhood. The house felt unusually quiet. Margaret was nowhere in sight. For a moment, it almost reminded me of the early years of our marriage, when silence felt peaceful instead of tense. "We need to talk," he said without turning around. I set my purse on the entry table. That seems to be a popular phrase lately. He finally looked at me. There were dark circles beneath his eyes. The last few days had clearly not been kind to him. The project delay is worse than I thought. I nodded slowly. I gathered that. He rubbed the back of his neck. 2 more clients are reconsidering contracts. I waited. He seemed surprised that I was not immediately offering advice. For years, I had been the person who helped him solve problems. The person who stayed up late reviewing numbers. The person who listened when nobody else would. Now I simply stood there. Emma, he said carefully, do you have any idea why this is happening? The question almost made me smile. You are asking the wrong person. He frowned. What does that mean? It means your company is your company. The words hung between us. He knew exactly why I said them. Because for years, whenever something succeeded, it belonged to him. Whenever something failed, we suddenly became a team. Ryan looked away first. That is not fair. Neither is being told to leave your home. Silence followed. Outside, wind moved through the trees. Inside, the distance between us felt larger than the house itself. My mother thinks we should move forward quickly, he said. There it was again. My mother thinks. My mother wants. My mother believes. I wondered if he even heard himself anymore. Of course she does. His expression tightened. Why do you dislike her so much? I stared at him in disbelief. That is your question? Just answer it. I laughed softly. Not because it was funny. Because it was astonishing. Ryan, your mother has spent 12 years treating me like a temporary guest in my own marriage. He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Deep down, he knew it was true. The problem was that acknowledging it would force him to confront every time he had looked the other way. His phone buzzed suddenly. He glanced down at the screen. Whatever he saw drained the color from his face. What happened? I asked. He looked genuinely shaken now. The bank wants updated financial disclosures. My pulse remained perfectly steady. That sounds serious. It is routine. But his voice lacked conviction. We both knew it was not routine. Ryan's company had always relied on momentum. Confidence attracted investors. Stability attracted opportunities. Once doubt entered the conversation, everything changed. His phone buzzed again. Then again. 3 messages in less than a minute. He read them one after another. Each seemed worse than the last. Ryan. He lowered the phone slowly. One of the board members wants an emergency meeting. I watched realization begin creeping into his expression. Not full understanding. Just the first hint that events were moving beyond his control. For the first time, he looked afraid. Not of losing money. Not of losing business. Afraid of not knowing what was happening. My own phone vibrated. A new message from Olivia appeared on the screen. I opened it immediately. Attached was a copy of another document I had never seen before. A confidential memorandum prepared 12 years ago during the restructuring of Ryan's company. I scanned the first page. Then the second. By the third page, my heart was pounding. Because hidden inside the paperwork was the answer to a question I had not even known to ask. The emergency funding that saved Ryan's company had come with a condition. A condition activated only if ownership became disputed. And according to the document now glowing on my screen, that condition gave me far more power than anyone had ever imagined. The board meeting was scheduled for Friday morning. By Thursday night, the atmosphere inside the house had changed completely. Ryan moved through each room like a man trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. Margaret remained confident on the surface, but I had started noticing the small signs. The tighter smile. The sharper tone. The way she asked questions twice when she did not like the answer the first time. Fear has a way of revealing itself through details. I was sitting in the sunroom reviewing documents when Ryan appeared in the doorway. You have been talking to a lawyer. It was not a question. I looked up calmly. Yes. His jaw tightened. Why? Why do you think? Rain tapped softly against the glass ceiling above us. The sound filled the silence that followed. Emma, if this is about the house, it stopped being about the house a long time ago. He looked frustrated now. Then tell me what this is about. I closed the folder in front of me. Respect. The answer seemed to catch him off guard. Respect. You made life-changing decisions without talking to me. His expression darkened. That is not fair. You keep saying that. I stood and walked past him toward the hallway. The problem is that facts do not care whether something feels fair. Later that afternoon, Olivia called. The moment I answered, I could hear excitement in her voice. The documents have been verified. My pulse quickened. All of them. Every single one. I sat down at the kitchen table. Tell me. The emergency funding agreement was legally preserved through every corporate restructuring. I closed my eyes briefly. Meaning your ownership rights never disappeared. For several seconds I said nothing. 12 years. 12 years of believing my contribution existed only in memory. 12 years of allowing everyone to describe me as supportive while ignoring what I had actually done. Olivia continued. There is more. Of course there is. The clause we found was triggered the moment ownership became disputed. My heart began pounding. Ryan created the dispute himself. Exactly. Outside, thunder rumbled faintly in the distance. I stared out the window toward the backyard. The maple tree swayed gently in the wind. Everything looked normal, yet nothing was normal anymore. When will they find out? I asked. Tomorrow morning. I thanked her and ended the call. For a long time I sat quietly at the table. Then I heard voices coming from the living room. Ryan and Margaret. I had no intention of listening, but certain words have a way of stopping you in your tracks. She knows something, Margaret said. You are imagining things. No. Look at her. She is too calm. I remained motionless in the hallway. Ryan sighed heavily. Even if she hired a lawyer, it does not change anything. Are you sure? Margaret asked. The uncertainty in her voice was impossible to miss. Ryan did not answer immediately. That silence spoke louder than any words. For the first time, he was questioning his own assumptions. For the first time, he was wondering whether the story he believed might be incomplete. I returned to my office and opened my laptop. An email from Olivia had already arrived. Attached was the final report prepared for the board meeting. I skimmed the first few pages. Then I reached the summary section. My breath caught, because there it was in black and white. The truth. The complete truth. The company Ryan believed belonged entirely to him had survived because of a financial rescue that legally connected me to its foundation. And tomorrow morning, an entire room full of executives was about to learn what neither Ryan nor his mother had ever bothered to discover. The woman they were trying to push out was one of the people who made everything possible in the first place. Friday morning arrived cold and clear. Sunlight streamed through the office tower windows, reflecting off the glass buildings across downtown. I sat at the far end of the conference room with a folder resting quietly in front of me. Around the table, executives reviewed reports and exchanged tense conversations in low voices. Nobody seemed entirely comfortable. The atmosphere felt different from every company meeting I had attended over the years. More cautious, more uncertain. Ryan stood near the presentation screen speaking with two board members. His suit was immaculate. His posture was confident. But I noticed the strain around his eyes immediately. He had not slept much. Neither had Margaret. She sat beside him wearing a navy jacket and an expression that suggested she still believed this meeting would somehow restore control. The board chair called everyone to order. Conversations faded. Papers stopped moving. The room settled into silence. Thank you all for coming on short notice, he began. We have several important issues to address. Ryan nodded confidently. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. The first 20 minutes focused on project delays, revised forecasts, and lender concerns. Questions came faster than answers. Each response seemed to create 3 new concerns. I watched Ryan carefully. He was trying to maintain authority, but confidence becomes difficult when the foundation underneath it starts shifting. Then the board chair opened a new folder. There is one additional matter. The room grew quiet again. Ryan looked up. What matter? The chairman adjusted his glasses. Questions regarding historical ownership interests and capital contributions. I saw Ryan freeze. Only slightly, but enough. Margaret frowned immediately. What does that mean? Nobody answered her. Instead, the chairman turned several pages. During our review process, previously overlooked documents were identified. Olivia sat near the legal team. She met my eyes briefly and gave the smallest nod. My pulse remained calm. The chairman continued. 12 years ago, the company survived a significant financial crisis because of emergency funding. Ryan cleared his throat. Yes, private financing. Not exactly. The room became very still. The chairman lifted a document. Records confirmed that the funding originated from assets controlled by Emma Carter. Silence. Complete silence. Ryan stared at him. Margaret stared at me. Neither looked prepared for what came next. That cannot be correct, Ryan said. The legal counsel spoke for the first time. We verified every document. Another folder was opened. The funding agreement also included provisions preserving ownership rights under specific circumstances. Ryan's face lost color. Margaret looked confused. What ownership rights? The answer arrived immediately. Mrs. Carter retained a protected financial interest connected to the company's survival and future restructuring. I heard someone across the table inhale sharply. Another executive leaned forward. You mean Emma was not merely a spouse? Correct. The attorney turned another page. She was a foundational financial participant. For several seconds, nobody spoke. 12 years of assumptions collapsed in less than a minute. Ryan looked at me as though seeing me for the first time. Not as his wife. Not as the person who organized charity events or attended company dinners. As the person who had quietly saved everything when nobody else could. Margaret finally found her voice. This is ridiculous. Her words sounded weaker than usual. Emma never built this company. I looked directly at her. No, I saved it. The truth landed harder than any argument could have. Ryan lowered his eyes. I could see memories moving behind them. Long nights. Empty savings accounts. Bills. Fear. Sacrifices. For the first time, he was remembering the parts of the story he had allowed himself to forget. The chairman closed the folder. Further review will continue, but one fact is now clear. He looked around the room. Mrs. Carter's role was significantly greater than previously understood. Nobody argued. Nobody could, because the documents spoke for themselves. And as the meeting adjourned, Ryan remained seated in complete silence while Margaret stared at the table. The balance of power they had relied on for years had just disappeared. And for the first time since that dinner conversation, they finally understood why I smiled. The drive home felt longer than usual. Rain streaked across the windshield while the city lights blurred into ribbons of gold and white. Ryan sat behind the wheel in complete silence. Margaret occupied the passenger seat, her posture rigid, her expression frozen somewhere between disbelief and anger. I sat in the back seat and watched the reflections slide across the glass. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if the truth ever came out. I thought there would be satisfaction, vindication, maybe even triumph. Instead, I mostly felt tired. Tired of carrying a story nobody bothered to understand. Tired of being appreciated only when sacrifice was convenient. The silence lasted all the way to the house. Ryan parked in the driveway, but did not immediately get out. Neither did Margaret. Finally, she turned toward him. You cannot seriously be accepting this. Ryan stared straight ahead. Accepting what? What happened today? Her voice rose slightly. Those documents do not change everything. He laughed once. A short, humorless sound. Apparently they do. Margaret folded her arms. Emma manipulated the situation. I almost smiled. Even now, she could not accept reality without finding someone else to blame. Ryan finally looked at her. Did she? The question caught her off guard. Of course she did. How? Margaret opened her mouth, then stopped. For the first time since I had known her, she had no immediate answer. Ryan stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward the house. I followed a few seconds later. The air smelled like rain and wet grass. Inside, the familiar rooms felt different. Smaller somehow, as though the illusion that had filled them for years had finally disappeared. Ryan loosened his tie and sat heavily at the kitchen table. Margaret remained standing. You need to fight this. He looked up slowly. Fight what? The ownership issue. The truth. Margaret's face hardened. Your wife is turning everyone against you. I watched Ryan carefully. A month ago, he would have agreed without hesitation. A week ago, he probably would have defended her. Tonight was different. Nobody turned anyone against me, he said quietly. I never asked the questions. The room fell silent. Margaret stared at him in disbelief. Ryan. No. He shook his head. I spent years talking about what I built. His eyes moved toward me. I never bothered to understand everything Emma gave up so I could build it. Hearing those words should have felt satisfying. Instead, they felt painfully late. Margaret looked between us. You are choosing her side now. Ryan laughed again. This time there was sadness in it. That is the problem, Mom. He leaned back in his chair. Everything has always been about sides. Margaret's expression changed. For the first time, uncertainty replaced certainty. The shift was subtle, but it was there. She was realizing something she never expected. Her influence was fading. Not because anyone forced it away. Because reality finally entered the room. Later that evening, after Margaret retreated to her guest suite, Ryan knocked softly on my office door. I looked up from my laptop. He stood there looking older than he had a week earlier. "Can I come in?" he asked. "You already did." He managed a faint smile. Then it disappeared. "Emma." His voice was quiet. "How many times did you save me?" I stared at him for several seconds. "Enough." He lowered his eyes. The answer hurt because he knew exactly what it meant. Years of sacrifices. Years of support. Years of opportunities one set aside so he could chase his dreams. He sat across from me and looked around the office. Family photographs lined the shelves. Old project sketches filled storage boxes. Memories surrounded us. "I think I owe you an apology." I closed my laptop gently. "Ryan." He looked up. "Yes." "An apology is not what scares you." His expression tightened immediately. Because we both knew the truth. The thing frightening him was not what he had already lost. It was the growing realization of how much more he might still lose. The following week felt strangely peaceful. Not because the problems disappeared. They did not. The company continued its review. Attorneys continued exchanging documents. Meetings continued filling calendars. But for the first time in years, I stopped carrying responsibilities that were never mine to begin with. The constant tension inside the house faded. The need to defend myself faded. Even the silence felt different. One evening, I sat on the back patio watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and orange. The air was cool. Leaves drifted across the lawn. For the first time in a very long time, I felt something I had almost forgotten. Relief. The sliding door opened behind me. Ryan stepped outside holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered one to me. I accepted it. We sat quietly for a moment. No arguments. No accusations. Just silence. "I met with the board again today," he said finally. "How did it go?" He laughed softly. "Honest answer? Always." He stared out at the yard. "I spent 12 years believing I built everything myself." I took a sip of coffee. "And now I know how much of the story I ignored." His voice carried no defensiveness. No excuses. Just regret. The kind that arrives when it is finally too late to rewrite the past. He looked toward me. I should have listened. I nodded slowly. "Yes." He smiled sadly. "You are not going to make this easy, are you? Was it easy when you told me to leave?" The question lingered between us. Ryan lowered his eyes. "No." Inside the house, a door closed upstairs. Margaret had spent most of the week avoiding both of us. The confidence that once filled every room had disappeared. She no longer offered opinions about my future. She no longer spoke about ownership. Reality had accomplished what arguments never could. Ryan folded his hands together. "My mother and I talked. That surprised me. And, for the first time in my life, I told her she was wrong." I studied his face carefully. He meant it. Not because of the board meeting. Not because of the documents. Because something had finally shifted inside him. How did she take that? About as well as you would expect. We both laughed quietly. The sound felt strange after everything that had happened. Comfortable. Familiar. Human. As the sun continued sinking toward the horizon, I realized something important. Winning had never been the goal. Revenge had never been the goal. What I wanted was acknowledgement. Truth. Respect. Things that should never have required a legal document to prove. Ryan looked toward me again. "What happens now?" I considered the question. The honest answer was that I did not know. Some things can be repaired. Others cannot. Trust is fragile. Once broken, it rarely returns in the same form. "Now," I said softly, "we live with the choices we made." He nodded. No argument. No defense. Just acceptance. The kind that comes after painful lessons. A gentle breeze moved through the trees. The last sunlight touched the windows of the house behind us. The same house that had started this entire conflict. The same house everyone fought over. The same house that turned out to be the least important part of the story. Because the truth was simple. A house is just wood, stone, and paint. What matters is the people inside it. The loyalty they show. The respect they give. The promises they keep. Ryan almost lost all of that because he listened to the wrong voice. And I almost forgot my own worth because I spent too many years proving it to people determined not to see it. As darkness settled across the yard, I smiled quietly to myself. Not because I won. Not because anyone lost. But because I finally understood something that changed everything. The house was never the prize. Peace was. And unlike everything else, nobody could take that away from me.